Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're looking at what I'm going to go out on a limb and say might be one of the most watched classic Who stories of the year 2024. It's Pyramids of Mars, which obviously became incredibly crucial to the revival era all of a sudden when a certain Osirian himself, Sutekh, rocked up in the Series 14 finale as the overarching villain of that season. But here he is, his origin story.
Not even rocked up because apparently he'd been there for ages and ages.
Yep, this is the story where he latches himself onto the TARDIS in the first place. It is interesting watching this with Empire of Death in mind, because there are like a couple of like little lines or like moments or scenes that leave you going, Russell did his research. Like they're pretty clear callbacks. Like one of the main ones that stood out to me is the line, "I bring Sutekh's gift of death," which is almost like one for one. Like,
yeah, I know. I recognized that immediately when I saw Empire of Death.
Yeah, it's really great. I don't know if I can say the same for this story. This for me is an episode that it's 4 episodes. It feels too long for that, if I'm being entirely honest. A lot of eps 2 and 3 especially, did not impress me much. I was kind of zoning out for a lot of it. I was sort of like, I think because here for me, and I'm gonna like jump right into it. Here's what I think is the main issue with this story. At the end of part 1, we learn that Sutekh is. We learn who's involved. We learn that Sutekh is our big bad. And then, like in the first 5 minutes of episode 2, we learn what his plan is, more or less. And then we have like an episode and a half where we're just sort of like getting to that point where it's like we don't really learn too much about Sutekh. We don't really learn too much about his characterization. We see these mummy robots really slowly ambling around this estate, setting up a rocket. And then right at the end of episode 3, finally things start to pick up again. The story picks up again, where the rocket is destroyed, the Doctor encounters Sutekh. And then episode 4, it's really good, because we actually get our encounter with Sutekh. We learn heaps more about who he is as a person. His plan changes. He uses the Doctor as a vessel. The Pyramid of Mars itself, which is the story's namesake, is finally infiltrated, and we learn...
And we get all those great little puzzles.
We get some like Osirian lore with the puzzles and all that stuff. We get all that stuff. We get Sutekh breaking out. And then 3 minutes after Sutekh breaks out, he's dealt with promptly. And a big thing that the story has going for it is building up Sutekh as this big... This is one of the things, honestly, that Empire of Death gets criticized for that I don't particularly agree with. Now, granted, I've got my own issues with Empire of Death. But something I hear thrown around a bunch is that Sutekh was dealt with too easily in that story. And when you look at the method of dispatching in a vacuum, yeah, they tied a leash to him and sent him flying to the time vortex. But you have the months and months or however long it is when Sutekh has won. You get those moments of like bleakness and direness and like hunting down the Doctor and Ruby through time. Here, we get really, really excellent build-up of Sutekh, where we get some really ingenuitive SFX techniques of like showing this otherworldly and all-powerful quality that he has. You know, we're shown all this. We're told by the Doctor how dangerous Sutekh is. We get told the comparative power difference. We get told all of this. And then for an episode and a half, nothing happens. And then Sutekh breaks out, and it's 5 minutes before the end of the story, and he can't do anything. while he's out. He's dealt with immediately, and I just don't think it's a very well paced story in that regard. I wanted to see more of Sutak. I wanted to see him actually do stuff, and we don't really get it. We just sort of get the mummy robots and the the crypt explorer, the Indiana Jones um teacher, sort of wandering around real slow and mumbling and all that stuff. And we're we we dress up the Doctor as a mummy, which is admittedly fun, but again, that only happens for a bit as well. We get this, and I'm sort of real quickly speed running all my issues with it, but I'm sort of on a roll here. We get maybe 5 minutes of watching this random fisherman explore the force field that they're in. This fisherman who never once has an encounter with any one of our TARDIS crew, never has a conversation with them, maybe utters six words throughout the entire story, and yet he's a real prominent focus in episode 2. It's really long. I don't think it's. I find much of this really boring, which is a shame to say, because some of it is really good.
Hmm.
A criticism which often gets levied at Classic Who, that we've brought up at times and we've said, well, no, I don't really agree with it. And the whole thing of like, you can watch the first episode and the last episode and you can skip everything
And that's
in
all you
between.
need.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way with this story. You only really need the first and the last episode, especially because the last episode, like the recap of that deals with the rocket, so you don't really need to.
Hmm.
I get it's also like it's really unfortunate that it's this episode, because like I said, it is way more important to the show now that it has a direct tie-in to, and an important tie-in to the revival series, and it's a shame it's not better. I wanted to like this episode. I went into it and I went, "Oh, it's the Sutek episode," and then I walked out of it going, Empire of Death might have been better."
Ouch. Um, I mean, I will say in a lot of ways, the Empire of Death was more ambitious because we're dealing with, end of the
Hmm.
universe situation and all the family drama that happens in the end, even if it's a bit uneven. Um, Look, I think those criticisms are pretty fair. Um, and I'm not just saying that to try and be, you know, um, what's the phrase I'm looking for want of a better term, easygoing. But
Well,
there, like, it makes sense. There is a lot of criticism with Doctor Who about the pacing in particular. And we've had our own fair share of stories
yeah,
that, you know, even though when you and I aren't too bothered by stories that may not make 100% sense, like the chase, for example, you've still got to
yeah,
have that kind of weird, compelling element because the chase is just so insane that you just kind of go with it. But we've had stories where either certain elements of the plot weren't worked in well enough, or stuff seems to be a bit haphazard. And I was wondering when I was watching the story for this podcast, am I going to have any of those reactions, or is Cuff going to sway me on any of this? Because for a long time, I actually really liked this story. But I will say part of it was because, and I've mentioned this before, but I used to do this a lot when I was a kid. I would only watch it from the point that I really liked, and that normally was episode 4.
Hmm.
Like, I'd seen other bits and pieces and documentaries and stuff, and they were really compelling, but episode 4 is where it's really exciting. I love all the weird little puzzles they have to solve. I love the tension.
yeah,
I love the conflict between the Doctor and Sutek. It's just fantastic.
yeah,
Even the ending doesn't bother me that much, and I'll get onto why that is. But yes, generally speaking, the 4th episode is the most compelling, and even for setup, I can kind of see what you mean in that you wouldn't need, like, you'd basically only need the first episode, maybe like 10 extra minutes from the other
yeah,
episodes to sort of sell the point. Um, with that said, I think there are a couple of things that should be pointed out here that you haven't quite touched on. They're not. I don't think they'll be enough to resurrect the whole narrative for you, and fair enough. But I think I want to bring them up. One of them is I quite like the disintegrating relationship between Lawrence and Marcus. I think there's quite a potent sense of tragedy. Is it worked into the narrative as well as it could be? No, probably not, especially when you consider that Lawrence dies very quickly, which I'm in two minds about that because it makes sense about, in a way it's about, the Sutek's Empire of Death, the fact that we're confronted with mortality so viciously and suddenly and so tragically kind of makes sense, but you wonder whether that could be expanded on. Regardless, I still really like that sense of tragedy. I think it makes it compelling and is probably the most compelling element. On note, as disturbing as it is, I actually really quite like the way the Doctor's characterized in this story, because I think there have been a number of stories where the Doctor is basically just being an asshole, right? We've seen this with the Sixth Doctor. I think from what you've said and what small bits of it I remember, even Capaldi's first season was not great for characterization because they just weren't sure what they were doing, and he wound up being really weirdly unpleasant.
Yeah.
But here, there's enough in the context of the story to make it feel different and very unsettling, but still kind of justified because you realize, excuse me, pretty quickly, how dire the situation is. Right, this is very much an end of the universe scenario. Granted, most of that we get I think in the back half of the story, even if we're, you know, where it's foreshadowed in the first two episodes.
Mhm.
But because of that, I find the Doctor's characterization interesting and weird, and again, very uncomfortable. Like, there's not a lot of humor here. He's being very cruel in a lot of ways. The fact that he doesn't have a lot of empathy for Lawrence and his feelings about his brother, but it feels right in the context of the story. And there's something, the fact that they're being kind of so bold with that characterization and making it work as well as it does, I find that actually quite compelling. In terms
Yeah,
of the ending, if I can just touch on that briefly,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I definitely see what you mean. It is, given the build up, it is weird. It's like, oh wow, I can move. Oh, what's this? I'm stuck in the time corridor again. No, Um, I don't find that a problem now, and I never really found it to be a problem. Um, Granted, I think at this stage of my life, I'm better at articulating why that is than I have in previous years. Um, I think I think it might be because there's enough of an emphasis on who Sutek is as a character and as a powerful force, so that I don't really need too much like death and destruction and too much action with him, like being able to move and things like that, because we've seen enough of it. And the fact that the Doctor defeats him by the end in that way, there's enough desperation in what the Doctor's doing for it to feel justified. And I frankly do still prefer it to the slightly haphazard, the issue. I think there, it's not even so much that it's rushed, because with both of them it is. I won't deny that. But with
Yeah.
Empire of Death, it's just, oh, magic dodge it, but it just doesn't work. And I frankly just don't think it works as well as it does here. I felt satisfied enough with Sutek's ending because and I don't know, maybe it is some nostalgia coming in here, but I always felt that Sutek was a very frightening, um, frightening villain from everything he does. From the fact that we see him nearly destroying the world, we see him moving the TARDIS with his mind, we see the great bit where the Doctor gets basically hypnotized by Sutek, and that's a sort of scene where in most other Doctor Who stories, I would expect the Doctor to pretend to be hypnotized, because that's the sort of thing that he's done before. But here, no. Sutek literally takes control over time of what's mind, the Doctor's mind specifically, and the fact that the Doctor lives is a little bit of quick thinking on his part, plus a bit of coincidence because of Sutek's arrogance. there's something quite chilling about the whole thing. So for me,
I agree
yes,
with
I
that.
understand. I understand with that ending why it's rushed, but it's it's still compelling enough for me, I think.
Look, here's the thing, and I'll
Hmm.
touch on the ending one last time, but then I want to address some of the other stuff.
Sure.
Both instances of Sutek's downfall can essentially be chalked up to essentially being put off guard by something that he wasn't expecting.
Hmm.
Yeah, with Empire of Death, it was like the anticipation of learning something about Ruby that he'd been seeking the answer to for a long time, and then the immediate bait and switch of, wait, what's this? Oh, I'm getting dragged now. And I think that there's something more believable about that than there is about, aha, I'm here. Oh, what's this, Doctor? You survived? I'm just going to have a real short conversation with you, and instead of immediately controlling your mind like I know I can do, and I've shown I can do, so that I can give you an opportunity to banish me to the time corridor forever.
See,
You know, like that's like,
I can understand that. You wonder
it's just
why.
looking at the text specifically, like purely based on what we see in each story. I find Empire of Death's portrayal of Sutek's like real narrow focus and arrogance, I guess. I find it more believable there than I do in this.
See, I'm.
Because in the previous, because like in the other one, it's like the Doctor's not pretend like the Doctor's from memory in Empire of Death, like it's Ruby like like literally like almost like a dog treat, almost like offering this like tantalizing secret and like, oh, you want to know so badly, like, and he's been characterized as wanting to know so badly, right? And
Mm,
then like the
mm.
immediate smashing of the computer and then the rope and then hey, what's this, but again, like, he thinks the Doctor's dead
Mm,
by the time Pyramid of Mars comes around, by the time that ending rocks up. And like,
mm,
based on what we've seen of what his field of view is, we know that as he's like slowly emerging from the sarcophagus, he can see what's going on. So he's got a clear view of the Doctor. And he doesn't have the thought of, the Doctor survived. I wonder if he's gonna try something here. I better real quick just like maybe do that torture thing that's real easy for me to do. If he's gonna fight back on like maybe I can't control him, he's gonna fight back. But like that torture thing is real quick. It's super
mm.
fast and it basically incapacitates him. Let me just do that while I walk away from the time corridor. It's so
Can
easy.
can I just? When you mean that, do you specifically mean when he's like trapped in the time corridor and he's
No,
like
no, when he's emerging from it for the first time before the Doctor sends him back through.
when he's right? Okay. So when he's like when he's leaving the Pyramid of Mars and he's trying
Yes.
to. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Look. Yeah. Fair enough. I think I'm glad you touched on the sort of the arrogance of Sutek because that's I think on clear display in both stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do find that element more compelling here because there's quite a lot of emphasis placed on it in this story. I mean, I know that like there obviously isn't an Empire of Death, but I think those conversations between Sutek and the Doctor in this story really solidify it. I was because I watched it today and I was even thinking in those last moments when we realize, oh, the Doctor's clearly got something up his sleeve. Sutek might not get out of this all right. Granted, I obviously know what the ending is, but for me, it worked because his arrogance is very clear. Like he says he basically says, I don't have any respect for any other sentient life. And the Doctor pinpoints that's why he seeks to destroy it. Um, and I don't know, maybe it's striking at the inner proletariat in me, but there's something very compelling about that, like an understanding of
Right.
um, power and corruption, and how, despite the desperate circumstances, there's something both satisfying but also believable about a tyrant's arrogance being their downfall. And I think there's enough desperation in context with how powerful we've heard Sutek is to still make that ending compelling, and the principle of him being dealt with quickly, that I'm not against. Like, it's still, for me, it still works. Having said that, you are kind of right to point out that there's more of a, maybe not so much an issue with pacing, but more just logic. Because as you say, if Sutak is as powerful as he is, and they emphasize that over and over in this story, why didn't he just use some weird mental torture thing? If the time corridor is, if it has these weird sort of temporal powers to stop Sutek from doing that, they probably could have emphasized that a little more, because the Doctor does explain how it works. But I think even as a kid, I remember it not being explained terribly well, and now
It's not.
as an
Yeah.
adult, it's not, still not explained that well when you
Well,
think about
maybe
it.
if they hadn't devoted 10 minutes to a fisherman, we might have been able to get a bit more of an in-depth explanation as to how it works.
Which is also a little weird, because you could still have, like, the bit where Lauren says, "Oh, we've got some gelignite." You could still have that, right?
Yeah,
You could say, "Oh yeah,
you
there's a
don't need
farmer
you
down."
don't need a fisherman to do that.
No, it's, you could just say, "Oh, old man Jenkins, he's getting the gelignite. He's out fishing.
Or, I
He's
mean,
probably gone from his cellar. Let's go get the
I mean,
gelignite."
here's also a bizarre concept. How about saying, "Oh, I dabble in fishing. I've got some gelignite."
Hmm. Yeah, that seems
It,
like a very
you cut like
sporty,
15
sporty
minutes out of your
gentlemanly thing.
story with that alone. You don't have to go running around for the gelignite. You can just
Yeah,
grab it. It's
yeah. There are simpler, cleaner ways of telling the story, I suppose you would say.
yes. That's my main
Anyway,
that's my main issue with the ending.
sure, yeah, yeah.
Like
No, that's
I
fair.
think we can both agree that the conversation between the Doctor and Sutek is one of the big highlights of the story.
Oh yeah, I'd
It's
say it's one
really
of the
well written.
highlights of the series. There's something
Mm.
kind of magic about it.
Yeah, just this like really simple way of reframing the two characters' philosophies, and like
Big
the
kudos to the performances. It's just,
oh yeah,
it's so great.
the
Gabriel Wolf is having a great
semi-respectful.
time.
Well, yes, obviously he shines whenever he rocks up in this show.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but like the semi-respectful cadence that they have for each other is quite
Hmm.
nice. Even though Sutek is like clearly like to him, he's like, oh, I'm showing you mercy by even engaging in this conversation.
Oh, he calls him a groveling insect.
Yeah. No, it's great stuff. Um, one of the things I wish they'd given more focus to is the way the Doctor is almost characterized in this story is kind of a jerk. Like his whole attitude towards the guy trying to like save his brother, and the whole obviously he's gone, why can't you think rationally about this? And then the contempt that he feels for him after his humanity comes through, to the point where, and it's kind of subtle, but after he's dead, um he just sort of like tosses the body to one side without a care in the world while he's gets back to like examining the framework of the robot mummy. And Sarah Jane briefly calls him out on it. I wish he'd been called out. I wish it had been more of a focus, because that he's behaving in almost like a weirdly Sutek kind of way in those moments where he's sort of disregarding other people's like feelings and stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think I find it fascinating, at least, and kind of compelling, because it demonstrates what the Doctor's limits are. Because yes, most of the time, almost regardless of regeneration, really. I mean, maybe not the Sixth Doctor, but almost regardless. He obviously would be having a lot of compassion for this person and understanding that the human perspective may be limited, and he may be in a desperate situation, and he clearly is. But that doesn't that shouldn't stop him engaging with his two hearts, so to speak.
Mm.
Um, the fact that he does here, I find it interesting, because it really helps to highlight how dire the situation is. Because the Doctor's done similar stuff before with a sort of a lack of compassion. I think there's a there's a scene in The Evil of the Daleks where he's basically in a Dalek prison, and he says that even if the Daleks would offer me all of the lives in this room, in exchange for the Earth, I wouldn't take it because the Earth, the greater good and things like that. So that makes sense, and I think given how desperate the situation is and how terrifying it is, it's enough to make it work for me. And because it's so different and weird and new and kind of uncomfortable and challenging, I find it compelling from that perspective. But it is still very strange, and there's
Yeah, and
probably a smoother way they could have incorporated it.
well, I think it needed a bit more of a highlight. I
Yeah,
think
especially
because
the calling out part.
it needed to be called out way more than it was. Sarah Jane
Yeah,
needed to put her foot down about it because, like,
yeah,
it, to me, it sort of walks the line between the Doctor's sort of like the way he can sometimes be kind of a dick to people who
yeah,
are like, but then like when he is facing an enemy that he takes way more seriously, it does sort of
mm,
he gets a bit more impatient with people, and
yeah,
I think the distinction needed to be drawn a lot more because I don't think
sure.
if this was your first impression of the Doctor, if this was your
Yeah, it
first
wouldn't be
impression,
great.
yeah, I don't think you'd walk out of this going. You'd
What a
kind of
great
walk out of this
character.
going. You kind of walk out of this going, Jesus, does that guy even have? Does that guy care about humanity at
Anything?
all? Like he
Yeah,
does he even like? And he says at the start of the story, "Earth isn't my home." When we
yeah. He
know
said
for
it,
a fact that's not
and
true, but
then there's that great, well, compelling at least line where Sarah Jane's, oh, sometimes I feel you're not even human. Well, not Sarah, and I can kind of understand the frustration because that's actually a really interesting idea. Sort of, the Doctor reckoning with his more human fascinations, but sort of reckoning them with more, the proclivities and the focus on the greater good that Time Lord society probably, I guess, indoctrinated him with. That's a really interesting question, but it's not really expanded here. And certainly, for better or worse, the fact that Sarah Jane's pushback isn't emphasized more, I could not imagine that happening
no.
in almost any revival story. Maybe a Chibnall one, but beyond that, um, I certainly couldn't. I couldn't imagine it happening with RTD. I really couldn't imagine it happening
No,
with Moffat, and even if Moffat did do that, there'd be some kind of um,
they'd be pushed back.
some correction to it, probably within the same episode.
Yeah, and
So
it's another thing where I'm like, I wish they'd focused more on this, but instead we get 10 minutes of following this fisherman around who bears no relevance to the plot, and like 15 different instances of the archaeologist guy walking over to the sarcophagus for a 1 minute conversation with Sutek, some of which you obviously could have crammed into several like shorter, slightly longer but less conversations. It was just so repetitious by the halfway through episode three. It
or
was like,
even
okay, now he's walking back into the big room
mm,
with the org, and he's going to put his arms over his chest. He's going to
mm,
give like a brief progress update. Sutek's going to give him a
yeah,
new order, and then he's going to walk out, and then 3 fucking minutes later, he's going to come back in again.
yeah,
Well, he's doing the delegation thing that happens in like middle office, like when you get your first office promotion and you're promoted to like middle management or whatever like
yeah,
that, and
yeah.
you just become the delegator. It was just heaps of that, and
I mean,
just
and
got
even then, right?
so monotonous.
Like one of the issues there is it's established that Sutek, he's obviously got quite a bit of power even within the Eye of Horus, but it is still limited, right? There's a bit
Yeah.
where he has to contain the explosion, and he can
Yes.
only do it for a certain amount of time. That's fine. That's a cool idea,
Yep.
and it works. But it surely wouldn't have been that, you know, it wouldn't have been that unbelievable to have his psychic powers extend to remote communication, right? Like, couldn't there be moments where instead of Marcus
Really.
standing in front of this sarcophagus, he's talking or having Sujak talk to him while he's moving around, like he is when he's in the Pyramid of Mars, like a constant telepathic
Well,
conference? Like,
also
wouldn't that work?
like on that note, like he has the ability to stop the detonation, but like no one told him that anything was about to detonate. He didn't need to be
Mm,
like. There's no scene where the doctor dude like sees the bomb, goes over to the sarcophagus and says, "Oh, there's a bomb on the thing. What should I do about it?" And Sutek goes,
mm,
"Oh, I'll be able to handle it." No, Sutek just knows
yeah,
about it. So why does he need to be
yeah,
updated
mm,
on all this other
mm,
shit
mm,
constantly? Like it's
sure.
see this is my main point. Like episode one, it's a really great setup, and it's like
Mm,
it's a really nice showcase of like there's a lot of the intrigue with the dude in the fez who's like I assume has been in some way manipulated into being a follower of Sutek.
yeah, like a
I have to assume.
yeah,
And then you get the build up to Sutek's big reveal, and I do like how there's the guy comes out of the sarcophagus, and you immediately assume it's Sutek, and he's got all this like grand power, and then it's oh this guy's just a follower. Oh god
mm,
damn, what's Sutek doing like that? It's really effective the way they use like irons on the bottom of his feet to like burn the carpets.
that
Just a
really like
really
the
really great
seventies
touch.
70s TV. That's really good use of effects,
Well,
and even the smoke.
in general, a lot of the effects in this are really excellent and have held up
Yeah.
super well. One of my favorite moments of ooh was when they reversed the camera footage to make it look
Oh
like
yeah, to make
the bullet.
the smoke
Yeah, like,
from the gun go inside his
yeah,
chest again. Yeah,
exactly.
no,
Yeah,
that's really good.
but then they continue the shot afterwards and have him walk
Mm,
towards the window. So they actually clearly walked backwards pretty
yeah,
convincingly, and then they
yeah,
did the squib effect. Like, there's a lot of cool moments like that throughout the
yeah.
middle, but they're really, really isolated moments.
Mm.
Um,
Also, with the last episode, there are a couple of other moments. There's that bit where the glass, you know, Willy Wonka tube appears
yeah,
around Sarah Jane, but the way that that bit is the effects used and it's edited, it's very smooth, which is very odd for a show like Doctor Who, where if you have an effect like that normally in the show, it's very clunky. Like
yeah.
I'm sure we've seen examples of that in Classic Who before, so that's quite good. And also, Marcus's death when he sort of just disintegrates.
Yeah,
The practical effects of that look really good as well.
and that's another thing Empire of Death calls back.
Yeah,
Um,
the
the
piles of
way
dust.
bone, the piles of dust and bone are very similar
Yeah,
to some of
yeah,
the deaths in that story as well.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's like I said, episode one does a good job of establishing everything, and then you get a few moments of decent build up throughout two and three. But for the most
Mm,
part, those two are really just drawn out and
mm,
clunky and messy, and like
mm,
you don't learn
mm.
anything new throughout either episode really. And then
Sure.
you get to episode four, which is the big showdown with Sutek. But by that point, you've got like only 10 minutes left to do the actual encounter. Even a lot of that
Mm,
cool like Osiren death trap stuff, which is
yeah.
pretty great and like almost like a weird like Riddle of the Sphinx callback kind of stuff.
Oh no, it is the
Yeah, like explicitly, yeah.
yeah.
But even all
Um,
that stuff, and it's too little too late. They needed to do more of that earlier on. I wanted
mm,
to explore more of the Osirans. I wanted to learn more about their culture. I didn't want to see a random ass fisherman. I keep coming back to the fisherman. Like he's like the like most obvious embodiment of everything that I don't like about this story is that like
mm,
we're, like 2/3 of the way through fucking episode two or whatever. Um there's been a character death. The guy that got shot by Ibrahim, I think, in episode one, has just been strangled by the robot mummies, and he's running away from the house, and he says something like "bloody murderers" or whatever like that, and he then runs off, and I'm like, that was your contribution to this scene. What are you adding to this?
mm. What do you mean strangle? Are you talking about the dude that gets crushed between the two robot mummy
That's the
chests?
Fisher. That's the Fisher. That's the guy I'm
Oh,
complaining about. There's the guy who gets shot in the chest in episode one, and then he's the first guy who recognizes the archaeologist, and then he's the guy who tells him that, oh, your brother's been looking, your brother might be looking for you or whatever, and then he's dispatched by the robot mummies. It's in episode two, see, even like you, a defender of this story, we're confusing several characters' deaths and like different other thing. Like it's not well written.
um, So this fisherman, he's not a great character, admittedly. Just kind of there. I must admit, I am. It is very funny and entertaining seeing you freak out about this
Well,
character. But to be
it's
honest, it's kind of justified.
it's so rare that literally all of the faults that I have with a story can be completely encapsulated by one thing. And to be
Yeah,
fair, not only that one thing is Rose Tyler, but in this case, it's
it's
like
a
a whole bunch of
fucking
different
fisherman.
it's a whole bunch of different unrelated issues and like
Mm,
storytelling things and like pacing issues, and but they all happen to
mm.
converge on
Yeah,
who I'm now gonna call asshole,
jeez.
because he's fully getting in the way of what could be a really amazing story.
Oh god. Um. Yeah, I don't have much clap back to that. That's pretty fair. Even if the issues that I think quite rightly pointed out, even if they don't bother me as much, they are what issues there are kind of encapsulated in that character, even if he's not the literal cause of all of them.
No.
And he himself is still, yeah, a very frustratingly pointless character. Because even what's his name? The guy from Three Doctors, the Duck Hunter. He had a bit more to do with the plot
Yeah.
than Mr. Fisherman does here.
There's
Um,
heaps of instances of like characters popping up, not having a huge amount to do with the plot, but still being like in some way important to the episode.
or at
Like,
least not being so important that they distract from
yeah,
the rest of
exactly.
the story.
Normally they're not nearly as distracting as this, because like I
Yeah.
keep waiting throughout episode 2 for this asshole to have some kind of relevance to the story, and
Mm.
then at the end of the episode he gets crushed in between two robots, and I'm just sitting there with my hands to the sky, like, and I'm just looking around for any kind of sign as to what the hell that was, and
But wasn't it
it's
cool,
not
Cuff? Wasn't the effect cool when he got killed by the two mummy robots?
not particularly, no.
I
Not
remember that
really.
actually. I remember it actually really freaking me out when I watched it as a kid, and it is nowhere near as impressive
No,
as an adult. So
of course not. Because
that
the
should
robots are, well, that's part of that is because the robots don't really look like they have all too much weight to them. Like they kind of amble around a bit,
hmm.
but I don't really get the sense that
Well,
they're as heavy as the and they can't be. Hang on a second,
no,
they
because
can't be
they're
that heavy.
yeah, because they're quite hollow. I mean, the
They're
doctor
mostly
establishes that.
hollow bandages and like mesh
Well,
frames with quite a lot of holes in them.
the doctor establishes that the bandages themselves are made from sort of weird
Sure,
sci-fi fabric that makes it really strong and pervious to a
yeah,
lot of damage. But
sure.
you're right to point out they're very hollow, quite literally, because we literally
Yeah.
see what's underneath the bandages. Um,
Yeah, and it is fun, like, to have the Doctor briefly disguise himself as one of these robot mummies. Which,
mm,
incidentally,
mm.
that is actually Tom Baker in that thing. It's not just
Yeah.
his voice getting
Oh, that's
dubbed in
yeah, that's
afterwards. It
funny.
was actually him.
Save on the budget for casting.
Sure. And
Thanks BBC.
something else that is quite fun, and we normally do a bit of like behind the scenes stuff, but this is part of season 13 of Classic Who, and every single story in season 13 is like some kind of like classic monster thing associated with it.
Yeah, I think this is the season with Terror of the Zygons. So you got the Loch
Terror of the
Ness monster there.
Zygons, Planet of Evil, Pyramids of Mars, the Android Invasion, the Brain of Morbius, and the Seeds of Doom.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So we've got mummies, we've got Frankenstein's monster, we've got evil vegetables,
I
classic monster. Um, we've got Loch Ness monster. Um, and what was it? Planet of Evil.
think so, yeah.
I think I'm not exactly sure what the monster. I think there might be like a possession thing in there, but anyway, that's still interesting. But yeah,
It's classic horror. It's classic horror and science fiction
yeah,
films
yeah,
are things that Series 13
yeah,
draw inspiration from or tribute to in some way.
yeah. I think in there's in Talons of Wang Chang, there's reference to the Phantom of the Opera because the villain
Mm-hmm.
is like the Phantom. It's got sort of a
Yep.
disfigured face and a mask and things like that. Um, I want to use that actually that reference to segue into a slightly pricklier issue that I want to bring up here. You possibly could see where this is going.
Sure.
Um, I want to talk about some of what I perceive as a bit of racism going on here. Look,
Look, right at the start,
I
I'll
don't know how
say,
much I can,
sorry,
how much,
just before we get into
yeah.
this, I'm gonna say it could have been a lot worse.
Oh yeah, no, this is not, Talons of Wang Chang, literal yellow face,
No.
situation. That being said, there are a couple of thingies that should be brought up, I think.
Yeah.
It's Ibrahim Namin. It's established he is Egyptian. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how to comment on this, but like,
I mean, is he like? Is it?
you
You can.
you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
is it Egyptian in the sense of like I came here from Egypt, or Egyptian in this
yeah,
I have Egyptian heritage? Because
yeah, and being from what I can tell, it seems he's played by a white guy, so I'm not sure.
well, that is a big
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think mainly the thing that makes me suspicious about it is because your theory there is quite possible, but the thing that makes me suspicious is this is Doctor Who in the 70s, right?
True. Yes.
We're literally gonna have the talents of Wang Chang in the next series. Is it really that far fetched to think that
No.
a show like this might be a teensy bit racist from time to time? Um, I mean, yeah. Look, again, maybe I'm like I don't know how much I can comment on this myself, but it just feels odd. That's what I'll say about it.
Yeah.
Also, the guys, the other Egyptian guys at the beginning who basically
Mhm.
just get relegated to, and like they're literally called,
Yeah.
superstitious
One is Ahmed.
savages.
Yeah.
Not a
Yeah.
great, not a
No.
great look.
Yeah.
Um,
That is fulfilling a role that like we're talking about its tribute to the mummy. It's a character
yeah,
that
yeah,
is in basically all Egyptology media. Like the locals who help the archaeologists and
yeah,
who
yeah,
believe in the curse and are scared of it.
yeah.
It's not. It's not like something that is unique to this show. In
And
fact,
there is,
those characters are the only non-Doctor companion characters who survive this story.
hmm,
Every
hmm,
single other person dies.
yeah. Um, and like I guess it helps with Scarman because he's being, well, obviously racist, but he's
Yes.
being, an arrogant, what, and his arrogance is his
He
downfall.
immediately faces karma for it as well.
Yeah. So that I guess it's something going for it, but I felt compelled to point all that out because
It's worth noting, yeah.
yeah, there's no way that, and I sort of saw it coming. I suspected there was something a little iffy in this regard with the story. And as you say, it's not as nowhere near as bad as it is in like the Talons of Wang Chang, for example. But
Yeah, there's
it's kind of
nothing
impossible.
there's nothing too egregious about it. There's
Yeah,
like a couple of things where you could go, oh, and then maybe
yeah,
like,
like
but
yeah,
and even then, like there are things maybe there are things that have like plausible, like I said with the Ibrahim thing, he could be talking
yeah,
about his heritage.
yeah,
These are things that have asterisks on them mainly because we know what this show can be like, so we do always have to
yeah,
be like, well, there is every single possibility that there was some malice here, and we do have to
yeah,
acknowledge that.
for sure. I think yeah, and I think for me, especially with the Ibrahim situation, the reason why it's so unsettling to me is again because we know the context of what this show is and can be. It can
Yes.
be great things, even in the 70s, it could be very progressive and interesting.
Yep.
But it had a lot of very British forms of racism that cropped up here and there. And I
Yeah.
think it's important we don't ignore that. I mean, I know I've said this before, but acknowledging these things and answering these questions, they're important, and we shouldn't be afraid to do that. Part of that process is just, I guess, in as responsible a way as we can, to acknowledge the ethical missteps that have, clearly taken place here.
Yeah.
I will say, though, thankfully, those elements, they're not good, but they don't take up a lot of the story. Kind of a shame that a lot of the rest of the story isn't as well put together as it could be, but still, they're not.
Mm.
The most of the main focus, I think, is the machinations of Sutek and his conflict with the Doctor, even if most of that happens in the last episode. But you know what I mean. The
Yeah. Yeah.
really uncomfortable stuff doesn't take up a lot of time in the narrative. So
Sure.
yeah, like and I know I've said this before, and I hope it doesn't sound like a cop out, but if someone were to watch this and feel uncomfortable enough to think, oh, this is just a bit too much Fitz,
Yeah.
I
That's
can
not.
understand that, and
Yes.
I can understand that with my perspective, there probably is a bit of privilege going on there. But for me personally, it's not good, and it's important to acknowledge it. But that element doesn't ruin the rest of the story for me. It's just a bit of a you know ethically up, I suppose.
Sure.
Um, Beyond that,
Yep.
I
Something I expected to get a lot more focus,
hmm,
especially at the start, is the location's context in unit history. The fact
oh
that
yeah,
these are the grounds upon which unit
we
would.
we, we dwell on hallowed ground.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's a heavy focus on it at the start where they're talking about, oh, so this isn't the unit I know, and then
In
the
fact,
Doctor has that moment where he's like, oh yes, this will be an excellent place for
hmm,
a military social and
hmm,
a military society scientific what
hmm.
institution, whatever he says, like,
In
and
fact,
then it's
you
just so
wonder,
and it's, after that it's sort of like completely dropped from the entire narrative
yeah,
and not
is it
relevant again.
until maybe the ending when the building burns down? But
Yeah, but
and I'll say,
even that could be anywhere.
yeah. Um,
It's like, oh, a building
Also,
burned down. Unit.
well, here's the thing, right? Um, this is a small, I guess, detail, I think. But with the unit building we see in the Three Doctors,
Yeah,
is this literally the exact same building? Because the
I
landscape
couldn't
surrounding
tell.
it looks very similar. Similar
It might
lake,
be.
similar forest.
I don't
Um,
know.
it
I
wouldn't
saw
surprise
that
me if it
episode a year and a
was,
half ago.
but yeah, and I don't know how intentional that was. It could just have been a situation where it's like, oh, guess what, folks? We're filming in the Forest of Dean, or I don't know, whatever forest they filmed in. But I don't know. Maybe I don't know whether there's a particular amount of thought put into that, but it's just funny to ponder. Also, tiny little detail worth pointing out though.
Hmm.
Apparently, the Doctor remembers events that haven't happened to him yet because he brings up
Yeah,
the whole 1666 fire of London, which
that
we now
that to
know happened to
me
the Fifth Doctor.
that to me lends credence to my theory that every now and then the Doctor will just randomly lie and like just bullshit to his companions to look more impressive than he actually
Yeah.
is. But it is interesting that they would reference the Great Fire of London and then later
Mm,
cause it. It's
mm.
um,
It's
but
it's funny.
here's another thing. Something real quick as well is I do appreciate. Again, this is more of a series 14 thing, but
Mm,
I like how they uh, the Doctor takes Sarah to the future to show what 1980 is going to look
mm.
like if
Yeah.
Sutek wins, and then later the 15th Doctor will do the same thing to Ruby when dealing
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the what's her name, the fucking the Maestro, um,
yeah. Oh,
and
yeah,
we
no,
now
that
know
was
that we now know that those are both
part of
similar
the
figures in
Pantheon.
the same pantheon. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that was a
Yeah, that was
in
compelling to
hindsight,
see it.
no, it was also in hindsight a nice hint from Russell in Devil's Cord that maybe Sutek might be involved in all this.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was
But
that was cool when I saw it
yeah,
in Devil's Foot.
but here's the thing. Sarah quite often says that she's from 1980, and that's pretty crucial to this thing. This ties in this episode's involvement in the so-called unit dating controversy.
Oh, it's to yeah, dating is in time, not yeah. Okay, no.
As in time, yes,
Yeah.
where like there's a big like discrepancy in when the brigadier retires from unit and when
Mm,
he's shown to be working for unit, where
yeah.
it's like that huge chunk of stories could be either set in the 70s or the 80s.
Yep.
There is no clear cut answer to it.
And he
It's
shows up
all
definitely retired in 1989, which is only 9 years after
Mhm.
supposedly where Sarah Jane is from. And then he
Yep.
also shows up in Mordred Undead in 1983, and I think he'd retired by that point though. Still, I see yeah, I see what you mean. It is weird.
It's,
Um,
it's something that is one of the most controversial and I arguably one of the worst elements of the world building of the show.
yeah.
To the point where like they like the Flux season of the show, and you might not remember this because it is so opposite of memorable, but there is a storyline where one of the characters is shown founding Unit, and we go through Unit's history and all that stuff, and there are no dates shown for any of it
Right.
because to put any date on it would just reignite the dating controversy thing, especially since
Hmm.
this takes place in 1911. And
Yep.
in the 50th anniversary special, um, they draw attention to it in a quite clever way, where while walking away, Kate Stewart asks to find one of her she asks on the phone to get one of her father's old incident files, and it's clearly about
Hmm.
Terror of the Zygons. And we can
Right.
hear her say 70s or 80s, depending on the dating protocol.
Oh God. Okay.
Yep, it's just
That's
in the
weird.
50th anniversary celebration, calling attention to one of its biggest world building missteps is a brave move, but
Hmm.
any attempt to like try and explain it away in any form, even as just a wink, is
Hmm.
a neat thing to do.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but back to this, I look, I've said pretty much everything I think I need to say about this story.
Sure. Yeah.
If you
It
there's
sucks, and you hate the fisherman. No, I'm not
I
kidding.
hate
Just okay.
the asshole as what I think we agreed we'd
Hmm.
call him. The new highmost figure in this pantheon of eldritch beings in the Doctor Who universe, alongside the Toymaker, alongside the Beast, alongside Sutek. Above them all is the asshole, the one who ruins good Doctor Who stories for the sake of screen time and nothing else. Um,
I'm gonna be laughing at this reaction from you for a long time, Cuff. I've got to say, this is just
well,
it's
look,
glorious.
it's just such a fitting encapsulation of literally every single thing that I think is getting in the way of this story being good.
Hmm. Yeah, which I
Just
mean, it's
this
pretty fair.
one fisherman, and
Hmm.
obviously that like there are more issues that aren't about him, but like they're all encapsulated by him.
Hmm. Yep. Sure.
Um, it's it's some good. It's a story with good ideas, good moments, really great production. Um,
Hmm.
especially for the time, some really great effects and stuff. Great performances, a good villain, or at least the promise of a good villain.
Yeah.
Good dialogue for the most part, but there are a lot of issues, especially around the middle, where I'm kind of like, ugh, I don't.
Hmm.
I just kind
Hmm.
of want to skip ahead to some scenes and then not really look at this ever again. This is so in between Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death.
Hmm.
They did this story as like a Tales of the TARDIS thing, which is that thing they did for the 50th anniversary, no, 60th
Hmm.
anniversary. I don't know if you remember this, where they brought back two of the older actors and put them in that little makeshift memory TARDIS
Hmm.
from Empire of Death and had them sort of reminisce about the past. And then they would just like play a previous classic era story cut down to either somewhere between like an hour and 2 hour length. Pyramids of Mars is one of them, and I think it would. I think it would work. I haven't seen that version of the story, but I think it would work so much better in that form. Just cut out a bunch of this middle stuff that doesn't matter, condense it down a bit, give us a tighter narrative, and it's all the better for it. But this is just way too long. It's too much of a slog. There's stuff getting in the way of it being really great, and I'm really not impressed by the end result. And I'm ashamed to say that because of the Sutekh of it all.
Would you say that he's certainly the most compelling element of the show, even if he doesn't reach
Easily,
potential?
easily, he's the most compelling part of this story.
Yeah. And would you, another hypothetical, do you think this story, for what it gives us, could have been achieved with 2 episodes? Like, I know that sounds, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Assuming you're not going to add anything in,
And cutting out the fisherman, of course.
well, that's obviously goes without saying. What I want to see is a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead style story starring the fisherman, but just to justify him, for God's sake. But yeah, if you're not going to add in any like any depth of Sarah Jane calling out the Doctor for his lack of humanity, or any of this other stuff we think could be there but isn't, then I think this is probably maybe a 3-episode story.
Oh.
I don't know about 2. I think there's too much in here for 2.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Look,
But
I think your criticism is pretty
episodes,
fair.
episodes 2 and 3 can be condensed into 1 easily.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. What are you going to rate it?
I'm giving it 5.
I'll give it a 6.
This puts Pyramids of Mars 0.5 higher than Empire of Death on average.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Sutekh is a villain who unfortunately has been a good element in mediocre stories, and that is his legacy. But next time, we will be looking at the Series 3 finale, Last of the Time Lords. Finally, resolving the Martha arc. Will this plot thread that we've been dissecting for a while, that we've been saying for ages, almost a year now, we've been saying for a while, will it pay off? Will it work out in the end? Finally, we're going to answer that question.
Fantastic.
But until then, I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And if I see that fisherman on the street, it's me and you. 1v1. No holds barred. Fists raised. I'm telling you right now, challenge me on the street. I know the actor is either dead or 80 plus by now. I don't care. I will find you and I will fist fight you to make my point. I know the actor itself is also not responsible for the characterization or the script, but you're the only person I can take my rage out on right now because I know what you look like. And I'm coming for you. Happy New Year.